Some of the best characters, Gustav, Ciel, and Lune, are all Nevrons, or at least creations of Clea. That's kind of what we're going to talk about today. On a broader scale, how Clea sort of masterminded Expedition 33, and through repeated involvement in the canvas, actually orchestrated the end of the conflict between Aileen and Renoir, and overall got the best outcome for herself. So it's going to be another theory video for Expedition 33, which I love talking about. I love theorizing. And this one, if I explain it well, should actually be less a shot in the dark. I think there's a decent amount of evidence for this actually, and kind of makes sense if you plug Clea's narrative in order together. It kind of makes sense that this is the direction she would go. If you're interested in that like I am, then I will get right to it. Thank you as always for being here, and let's just get into it. So where do we sort of start with this theory? Where does this theory kind of originate for me? Well, throughout the game, you meet a lot of these fading characters, right? There's like a fading boy, a fading woman, a fading man, and they all have these very cryptic dialogues that make no sense the first time you play through. At least they didn't make sense for me. Maybe you were really smart and you knew what was going on. I had no clue. But then the second time, maybe third time through, when you talk to them again, a lot of what they're saying gets really interesting because they're kind of pointing out a lot of other stuff that's going on that makes sense late game. And one of the most interesting things that I found going through again was talking to the fading boy at Stone Waves Cliffs right before the end of Act 1. His dialogue sort of addresses the whole party, which at this point would be Gustav, Lune, Ciel, and Mael. And if you click the essence option, when that comes up for the dialogue choices, he will talk about how your essence is different, and it is actually very similar to the essence of the creature of darkness at the end of the path, right, which we know is the Lampmaster. The Lampmaster is, of course, a Nevron, which is a creation of Clea. So if your essence is the same as, or at least similar to, the essence of a Nevron created by Clea, then it's probably true that your essence is created by Clea. And honestly, I mean, the whole video could end there, but I think there's a lot more we can talk about that would support this idea. Why would she make these characters Nevrons? Like, what would be her reasoning? Why would this be important to her? And I think if we look at her position in the conflict, it kind of makes sense why she would do this, right? We know that Clea is outside in the real world fighting a war with the writers, but she's doing it alone, right? Her parents are stuck in this canvas for a long time, and she can't get any help from them. So her motivation is to get them out of the painting to help her fight the writers. And we know that she actually repeatedly enters the canvas to get this done, despite cutscenes and dialogue sort of making it seem how she doesn't super care about this, and she's kind of over it and bored, and she just wants it to be over, but she doesn't really care, right? She's actually super involved throughout the entire conflict. And it kind of boils down to two main things, right? We know that she makes the Nevrons, and then there's also a lot of evidence that she goes to expeditioners to try to kind of speed up the process of ending this conflict. For the Nevron side of things, it's explained pretty plainly in the game, right? Clea abducts the painted version of herself and repaints the poor doppelganger to constantly make Nevrons, which creatures killed by Nevrons, their chroma is trapped within their bodies, so it is stuck and not able to go back into the painting. This makes sure that Aileen is constantly in a weakened state and hopefully gives the advantage to Renoir. However, this tactic obviously takes some time. They've been stuck in this conflict for like 67 years. Despite all of the Nevrons killing all the expeditioners, things aren't quite over as fast as she would like, so she turns to expeditioners to actually directly attack Aileen. She's constantly trying to kick her mother out because she knows Renoir will leave on his own once the conflict is over. For the expeditioner side of things, Clea mainly seeks the help of two expeditioners from Expedition 0, Simon and Painted Verso, who we will just call Verso for the remainder of this video. So first, Simon was a great warrior who had a relationship with the painted Clea, the one who was abducted to make Nevrons. But Clea, disguised as her painted self, who she had just abducted, tricks Simon into seeking out Aileen's destruction, right? This is her first real attempt to just end things outright by powering up an expeditioner, right? She gives Simon the power to slay some of the strongest beings besides painters in the canvas, which are Axons. So he gets that power from Clea, and then goes and slays Axons, goes all the way up to Monolith to confront Aileen. However, Aileen is able to explain the situation and send him in the direction of Renoir. Through her manipulation, he goes down into the abyss to meet Renoir in the jail that traps him. Unfortunately, Renoir, as a powerful painter, sort of again manipulates Simon's mind and ends up making him lose his sanity and traps Simon underneath in the abyss. So ultimately, Clea unfortunately fails in her first attempt with Simon. Clea's other option, and probably the most interesting option for this topic, was Verso. Verso was also a member of Expedition 0, and an immortal creation of Aileen's painted family. His invincibility makes him a prime target for Clea, and she constantly tries to recruit him throughout the events leading up to Expedition 33, right? If you have the dialogue with Mael, Painted Verso will talk about how he has been approached by Clea 3 times to be recruited in an effort to sort of end the conflict between Renoir and Aileen. The first time is when Expedition 0 first reaches the barrier, right? Clea explains explains to Verso everything about the canvas and their immortality and everything going on with the painters. But despite Clea's plea to sort of help her out and end this conflict, they get into some sort of fight. Obviously, since it involves immortal beings, no one actually wins. They just kind of come to this standstill, and Clea leaves Painted, Renoir, and Verso alone. Another big point in Verso's story is we know from different dialogues and journal entries that at some point Verso and Renoir separate. Renoir still wants to protect Aileen, but Verso ends up wanting to destroy Aileen and get the painting erased because he wants all the suffering to come to an end. And now finally, Clea has another opportunity here to try and recruit Verso, because now their sort of interests align, right? Clea also wants Aileen out, Verso wants Aileen out, and you would think it would go well. However, we kind of get a notion from the dialogue again with Mael that Verso just has a very enormous hate for painters in general. So it seems like because she is just a paintress, even though their motivations align, he has no interest in joining with her, and we can assume that's why he doesn't join her the second time. And then he goes off to join Skie and Minoko, and that's when they go off and have all their adventures before Expedition 33. Now, we know from the flashback portion of Alicia's story, right, after the end of Act 2, you go back in time and see how Mael got into the painting, or at least how Alicia became Mael in the painting. This is the third time that Clea approaches Verso, except this time she can do it under the guise, I need you to protect my sister, which is also your sister, because she's being repainted as a being like you. There's this really confusing situation that Clea sort of capitalizes on, right? Sort of under that guise, she sort of gets Verso kind of on board and on the same side, and this is a very big moment because she finally has the duo that she's been trying to get, right? If Verso was on her side, then they would have this team of a real life painter and an immortal being, right, which would be a very strong duo for anybody to stop, but Verso would never do it. But now with Alicia in the painting as Mael, if she can get them together, then she's done what she's been trying to do for the whole past 67 years, which is get a painter and an immortal being on a track to go fight one of the painters, which in this case would be Aileen. So we can kind of see how much she's already been involved, but then with Expedition 33, I think she gets even more involved. Up until now, most of what we've talked about is already explained in the game. These are things that you can find in dialogues, journals, stuff like that. So I haven't really gone too deep into things, but I've hopefully put them in a more chronological order of Clea's story, where we can kind of focus and point out some major things. So we're just going to go back into that really quick. To start, Clea is very involved in the story of this canvas, right? She's created Nevrons, she's painted over creations, and she's noted to be the only one to be able to actually paint over other people's creations, and we can see that when she paints over her painted self to continue to create Nevrons, and that she has repeatedly tried to recruit powerful expeditioners to her cause, even allowing them to grow more powerful. But she has failed many times, and now she has this golden opportunity with Expedition 33, where she has a real-life paintress, and she has an immortal being on her side, Verso. With all this coming together, she's actually very interested in the journey of Expedition 33, and we're going to get really into theory at this point. We're going to go away from what's talked about in the game and really focus on how this theory would work, because I think this theory explains a lot of other questions that the game has to offer or that still haven't been answered. To start, even with this golden opportunity, there's obviously people in the world who don't go on expeditions, right? We know that motivation to go on these expeditions has gone way down because they're failing so often and the numbers are getting very low. So there's not a lot of people actively going on these expeditions anymore. So how does Clea make sure that the most powerful expeditioner there could probably be goes on this expedition? And if she was raised in an environment with people who want to go on an expedition, then her values would align going on this expedition. So how does she do that? Well, there's two options. She could have created Gustav, Lune, and Ciel, who have an inclination to go on expeditions, and that's how they all met up and became friends and hung around Mael, is because they were created to. The other option is she repainted over 3 beings in Lumiere, right? She repainted over them so that they would be more inclined to go on the expedition and meet up with Mael, and that's kind of how she created this group to make sure that Mael was surrounded by people who'd go on an expedition and get her on the expedition, because that's the whole point. So then, I mean, that not only explains the sort of group that comes together for Expedition 33, there's a couple other little things that it checks off. It also explains how Gustav could be the one to come up with the Lumina converter, which ended up being the very thing the expedition needed to succeed because it makes them grow more powerful, and we already know that when she wants an expedition to grow more powerful, she does that, right? She did it with Simon, she made him more powerful. Now she's made this entire expedition group more powerful by allowing Gustav to come up with the Lumina converter. Then we come to the sort of second question, is how did all of these characters survive the beach, right? At the start of Act 1, they all arrive on the Dark Shores and they get absolutely slaughtered by Painted Renoir and the Nevrons. There's a lot of questions I feel like they're still unanswered in the community, right, on how Gustave survived, how CL ended up in the Yellow Forest, where did Lune come from, and I think this explanation, or this theory actually accounts for all of these questions, right? To start, we know that Mayel was taken by Verso off at the beach. It's kind of implied that that's how she gets to the manor, right? Verso takes her to the manor. Clea got Verso on board for protecting Mayel, but she didn't actually get him on board for an expedition or going to kill anything because he's still not very into painters. So she doesn't quite know what he's doing. He's just taken away Mayel, the painter, and taken her to this manor where she may figure out everything about the family, everything about what's going on, and she doesn't really know if Verso is going to try to persuade her to his own side or to actually continue the journey to go fight the Paintress. So what she needs is to give Mayel a reason to continue the expedition, right? She needs her expedition friends. So it makes the most sense that they did all die on this beach, and then she just paints them back to life. She just brings them back. And that would make sense of how Gustave ended up surviving, quote unquote, and then making it to the meadow, right, without, even though he was unconscious, right, he just appears in this meadow, right? It would make sense if he died and then Clea just repaints him into the meadow. It would be the same for CL, right? Painted all the way in the Yellow Forest. Why would she paint CL in the Yellow Forest? Well, because Mayel is actually in the middle between the meadows and the Yellow Forest. So if she were to go back, she would find Gustave. If she were to go forward with Verso, whichever way they go, she would then find CL, right? And that's kind of the point, is that she would meet up with an expedition or friend, whichever way she went, and thus probably be more inclined or reminded of her journey to go be an expeditioner. And I think that's what she was hoping for, and that's why they're so spread out differently. So Lune is the only wild card here. She has a ton of options that could be the case. She could have, one, actually escaped and been alive. She could have actually gotten out of there. Two, she could have died and been repainted in the split second to make sure Gustave lives. Because there's no sign of her anywhere. She doesn't come out anywhere. She only shows up right when Gustave is about to die again. So I think Clea might have just repainted her in that area in the last moment to sort of keep him alive. So she had to create a reason for Gustave to survive so that if Mayel met them, not all hope would be lost. So yeah, I guess those are kind of the two options. She either survives on her own, which is possible. There were a couple other survivors that we saw, right? Because that theory doesn't really count for them. There's those two other people. There's the person that Gustave sees in the slaughter area, and that's the reason that he's going to persona himself. She sort of lived for a bit, and then there is the one running at the indigo tree who gets slaughtered by the boss there. A couple people probably survived. Lune might have been one of them, honestly. But just for the people that randomly appeared places, with no question, it accounts for it. So as we know, all of these party members in different areas meet up, and they finally go on to the journey as she had hoped, right? They find Mayel and get her back on the expedition ride, and then the end of Act 1 happens, and Verso joins the party officially, and everyone is on board going the direction Clea wants them to go. And I'm sure after reviving 3 creations at once, she is pretty tired. We know from Mayel making some characters come back. It takes a lot of chroma and time to do all this, so I'm sure Clea is back out of the canvas. At that point, she kind of takes a rest. We finally get to the final fight, which is where Clea makes her final act to actually end this conflict, while the party fights Renoir in the final fight as sort of the curator, right? He is constantly healing, and once you get him down to low enough health, he'll just heal all of his health back. And it takes Aileen coming into the canvas again and kind of destroying the other Axons that are helping him for the party to win the fight. However, Aileen should have never been able to get into this fight. She should never have been able to find the painting, because as we know, Alicia and Clea hid it, and it was noted that Alicia would never be able to find it, and it was a great hiding spot. We don't even know where it is. Not even the player knows where it is. So the only way Aileen could have gone back into the canvas is if Clea showed it to her. So she clearly knew what was going on in the canvas and saw they needed some help, and then said, here's where it is. Aileen, go in and finish this. And that's what happens, and altogether they all win. So Clea orchestrates that, which ends the fight, which leads us to the final endings, both of which are a good outcome for Clea, because Renoir and Aileen are out of the canvas either way and are able to help with the writers, right? If you take Mayel's ending, it does ensure the survival of the canvas, which is a win for Aileen, but both parents appear to never return to the canvas. It's not specifically said, but we know most likely Renoir will never be back, so at least he will be able to help out, and it doesn't seem like Aileen ever comes back in the little flash forward we get there. There's no reason for her to, because Alicia is now taking care of the painting. So ultimately, a win for Clea. She at least gets one parent out permanently, and at least a second parent out where it's not hurting Aileen anymore. And then there's Verso's ending, where the canvas is completely erased, which means Renoir essentially gets what he wants, but both parents definitely are never going to re-enter the canvas, and she gets her entire family back that can help her fight the writers. So either ending favors Clea, which is why I think she is the overall mastermind of this entire conflict, and especially Expedition 33, because she's constantly involved with everything that goes on, and she even makes the party members specifically to advance Mael on the expedition. That is the whole point of the theory. Hopefully I explained it correctly. In summary, the conflict between Renoir and Aileen was taking too long. Clea wanted to get involved, so she made Neverons. Neverons were going too slow, so she went to Expeditioners. Simon didn't work. Verso didn't work. Verso didn't work again, until finally a real paintress enters the canvas that's not her, that can actually do damage. So she gets Mael paired up with Verso, and then makes sure they go on this expedition, because Verso doesn't actually hang out with her while she's in Lumiere. So she forages these 3 people, or at least repaints over 3 other people, to be involved in the expedition, to be involved with Mael's life, so that Mael is sort of pushed forward towards being an expeditioner. She finally goes on an expedition with these people, and when they all die, she is worried that Verso and Mael may not go on the expedition anymore, so she repaints the expeditioners that she had already created, right, and then puts them in different places so that hopefully Mael will find them and go back on the expeditions, which she does, and they go on the expedition. And then when Gustav dies, Verso comes on board, and with Verso on board on the expedition, she no longer really has to be involved in the expedition until the end, when they are losing. And then she sends her mom, Aileen, back into the painting to be the trump card and actually win the fight, and then either ending, she gets at least one parent permanently out of the canvas, which is what she wanted the entire time to help her fight the Riders. That is how she's the mastermind and very involved in everything in this game. Hopefully I explained that correctly, not correctly, but competently. Yeah, shoot, that was a fun one. I really like talking about that stuff. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you guys for watching. If you're already here at the end, you're a trooper, man. Sometimes I ramble, but I appreciate you as always, and I hope to see you in the next one. If you have any theories about this stuff, if it makes sense to you, let me know, please. I love some support, because I feel like I'm talking to an echo chamber here. Because I don't know if these theories make sense to me. I love these theories. If you guys have any of your own relating to this, that would be awesome to hear as well. I do eventually read comments. I'm just very scared when I first post something that everyone's gonna be mean, so I don't look at them for a while. That is my solution. Yeah, see you guys all in the next one. Bye.